Hi there YouTube, this is the Magnus, bringing you another Total War Warhammer faction review summary. We're going to be taking a look at the very powerful Empire as far as their viability in competitive multiplayer battles, specifically the ladder and tournaments. So we're going to start off with a general kind of review of the faction, and then we're going to talk about the units specifically. Now, the Empire is virtually without question the most powerful faction in the game. Why is that? Well, they have a lot of units, and most of their units are very well specialized against certain kinds of enemies, and that allows them to be incredibly cost effective, and having that wide range of units to work with gives them a lot of versatility, that they can react to just about anything. So as far as legendary lords, the General of the Empire is an obvious choice, generally put on the Imperial Griffin, but he is quite good on foot or on a warhorse. Ability wise, Hold the Line at 68 in its new constant incarnation is certainly worth it. Blood Roar at 136, only -4 leadership, definitely a no-go. I would avoid all of these abilities as well. They just don't provide enough value. So you're just going to go with Hold the Line, and item wise, the Potion of Toughness or the Potion of Healing, depending on your preference. So far I believe I like the Potion of Toughness better. Now, if you hadn't seen, the Grim and Grave patch made it so that you can only heal 60% of your health with potions, and then potions are no good to you, so you generally just want to bring one potion now. The General of the Empire is definitely extremely viable, possibly the most viable lord that you can go with. Boris Todbringer doesn't really bring anything unique to the table at all, so I would say generally avoid for competitive play. Karl Franz on Deathclaw is very viable. Again, Hold the Line is the only ability you want to go with. Item-wise, 26 seconds, 21 seconds, regardless of how good these things are, for how expensive they are, and 135 second cooldown, they're just not viable. So again, just with Hold the Line and whatever amount of choice, generally you're going to go with flying, but there are situations where you might want to stick your leader on the ground. Karl Franz is very good. Balthazar Gelt, the Lore of Metal, for the majority is not very good, and the Arc Lector and Volkmar the Grim, from what I've seen so far, are not very cost effective. So let's take a look at heroes who are usable. I would go with the Empire Captain and the Bright Wizard and the Amber Wizard as your only choices here. The Witch Hunter is just kind of underwhelming, just like the Warrior Priest. The Light Wizard, with the nerf to the net and to Shem's Burning Glare, is just not very good. The net is still kind of useful, but it just isn't justified, and the Celestial Wizard is probably in the weakest magic class. Now, he does have pretty good buffs and debuffs, so he isn't completely useless, so we will look at him. For the Amber Wizard, generally you want to go flying. If you want to save some money, you go with the Pegasus, but the Griffin is much better. For fighting, Wildheart is good, and so is Arcane Conduit. As far as spells, you are going to want the Flock of Doom, good area of effect damage. You're going to want Pan's Impenetrable Pelt, which is a pretty good buff, reducing damage by 22% and increasing speed. And you're also going to want Kadon for spawning a Manticore, which is the primary reason to bring the Amber Wizard. So he comes at 1813 with his recommended build. The Bright Wizard, again, you're generally going to want to go flying. Ability wise, I do not use Kindle Flame. I do bring the Arcane Conduit. Fireball is situational, but generally not good, just because your magic is much better spent on cascading Fire Cloak and the Flaming Sword of Ruin, and I go with no items. So at 1131, you're getting two very powerful buffs and a very mobile flying hero. The Celestial Wizard. Again, flying is generally going to be the way you go. Roiling Skies, unless you're expecting a giant air battle, is never worth it. Spell-wise, Harmonic Convergence is a decent single target buff. Wind Blast, very situational. Curse of the Midnight Wind is absolutely fantastic. It virtually renders your opponent's infantry useless, and if you overcast it, it lasts damn near a minute, so it's very powerful. The Thunderbolt is awful, so is the Comet and Chain Lightning. So at 1135 you get a very strong area of effect debuff and a strong single target buff. Last, we have the Empire Captain, who again, flying is generally the way you're going to want to go with him. Hold the Line is usable unless he's going to tag along with one of your flying lords, then you don't want to go with it. And again, the Potion of Toughness. So at 1052 you get a very potent fighter, and generally you can bring 2 of these and still have good effect. Now we're going to take a look at infantry. Spearmen got a nerf to their attack speed, so I haven't had a lot of chances to test them, but overall for 300 they are a very decent unit for countering large and just kind of holding the line for a limited period of time. If you think you're going to face a lot of missiles, you might want to go shields, but I still think you're probably just better off with a spearman unless we're talking a lot of missiles. Swordsman can be useful against factions where you don't expect any large. The dwarfs, of course, are the obvious example of this, but there's other situations where you may not plan on encountering large, and then the swordsmen are a much better mainline cheap infantry than your spearmen and even possibly your halberdiers. The new flagellants, from what I've seen so far, due to their very low armor, well, their non-existent armor, and their inability to carry a shield, these guys get shredded pretty early and aren't that viable. The halberdier is a very cost-effective unit for fighting large, and armored infantry it does quite well against because of the armor piercing, and it has great charge defense against large. Overall, a very, very cost-effective infantry unit. Sigmar Suns look promising because of the Unbreakable, but I haven't tested them enough to make a full recommendation. The Tattersouls, I'm not seeing it. A glorified flagellant is still a flagellant and not very good. The Greatsword is the best, most cost-effective anti-infantry unit in the game. Armored piercing, and we're talking 100 armor by the way. Anti-infantry, good health. These guys can hang with units that are much more expensive than them and cut down anything that's similar price or lower. Anytime you're facing any sort of armored opponents, you're going to want to bring some great swords. They're just that darn good. They even do well against some cavalry, which is just unbelievable. Looking at the missiles, everything has potential viability here. The Free Company Militia, if you can use their Vanguard deployment and get them behind your enemy, they're going to be quite effective at shooting into the back of your enemy. And then of course if they turn to fight him, he does have decent melee skills, so he's quite good. If you want more punch, the crossbowman is very good at that. He has much better range at 160. And as far as his missile damage, he does have 4 armor piercing, which is better than a lot of traditional bowmen, but nothing to get too excited about. But if you're fighting a generally unarmored enemy, low armor enemy, 1 or 2 of these is definitely useful. Against armored enemies, you're going to want to go with the handgunners because of their armor piercing missiles. Their range at 145 is nothing to sneeze at. Good ammunition, good missile damage, and out of that missile damage, 16 armor piercing, which is very strong. The Sterling's Revenge is quite possibly the best of has the potential to be the best of the new units introduced in the Regiments of Renown. The reason being is he fires armor-piercing missiles, which do 14 armor-piercing damage. His Vanguard deployment, just like his Free Company brethren, but what makes him really interesting is stock, and that is that he can stay hidden just about anywhere until he gets into range. So he's great for deploying to the sides or the rear of your enemy, following them in and getting those shots right away because you don't have to worry about hiding him in forests or trees. He's good anywhere. So quite a good unit. The Silver Bullets have armor piercing and stock as well. This makes them very interesting. They also do magical attacks. So these guys are, obviously geared towards killing vampires and monsters and armored foes, and they definitely have a lot of potential. Again, I haven't played with them a lot, so I don't know just how darn good they can be. Looking at cavalry, Empire Knights for the price are definitely a decent anti-infantry cavalry. If you have more money to spend, the Knights of the Blazing Sun are a considerable upgrade, a much higher charge bonus, and they also have magic resistance of 40%, which can be useful in certain circumstances. But the biggest thing is that they do flaming attacks, so they're going to put a serious hurting on the undead, and they're going to do well against armored opponents because they're doing magical damage instead of physical. So that makes the Knights of the Blazing Sun very viable. I would say, for the most part, I would use these over Reiksguard now. So if you used Reiksguard in the past, most of the time the Knights of the Blazing Sun are actually going to be a better choice. And the Reiksguard, since I already just mentioned them there, are definitely a very good cavalry unit, but the Knights of the Blazing Sun seem to have them edged out. Zintler's Reiksguard is an improved Reiksguard. Basically what you're really getting is leadership and melee attack out of these guys. The advantage of that being, if you're the type who isn't real good about cycle charging, you might want to bring them instead of the Reiksguard, but overall I'd just rather have the Knights of the Blazing Sun. Demigryph Knights are a very good cavalry unit, but again, compared to the Knights of the Blazing Sun, they don't have as much charge damage, they don't have as much health, and they have far better weapon strength, so they're going to be able to hang in there a little better as far as doing damage non-charge. But generally I would say bring Knights of the Blazing Sun. Demigryph's Knights, with halberds are quite good though. These guys are a staple in many Empire armies, and for good reason. They are absolutely great at killing other cav, which if you have cavalry on the field, odds are you're going to face other cavalry, and if you have anti-infantry cav, you're going to get slaughtered by these guys. So they're absolutely fantastic, a must-have in a lot of circumstances. Now you can upgrade to the Royal Altdorf Griffites for an additional 300, but at that much higher of a cost, I don't feel you're getting a great trade-off. I mean, they do cause terror, and you're going to get some more melee attack and defense, but just the cost is a big turn-off for me, so I'd generally say go with the Demigryph Knights. Looking at Missile Cavalry, I'm just going to tell you outright, I feel Missile Cavalry sucks in this game, and it definitely needs to be retuned, or these guys need to be cheaper. Right now I'd say don't bring them unless you have a very specific build or opponent in mind. The Mortar and the Great Cannon are both very cost-effective artillery, especially if you are not going artillery heavy. You just want to have something to either punish the enemy infantry before the engagement and make them come to you, or do the same against large. And of course, which one you go with is going to be largely based on what faction you're playing against. The Hammer of the Witches is a improved Great Cannon. You'll see that the stats go up significantly, enough to justify a 50% cost increase. In most circumstances, I'm going to go with no. The Hellstorm Rocket Battery is great against the dwarfs specifically. There's some other instances where you might be able to use it, but at 1350 it does get pretty prohibitive. The Hellblaster Volley Gun at 1450 is just overpriced for a limited ranged artillery. This is very hard to use well and get good results. The Sunmaker is amazing. It shoots so many rockets in such a short period of time, and you will actually go through all of your ammunition pretty quickly, pretty regularly. You will get to use all the ammunition, which is quite good. But it is a difference of 600 more. Now it does do, I mean, look at the damage on this thing, right? 588 versus 304, nearly double the damage. So this thing really pours it on. Against the dwarfs, this is probably the worst and last thing they ever want to see on the field. So I'd say bring it against them if you can swing the price. Other than that, though, if you have an opponent that tends the blob, or a faction that's just going to bring a ton of infantry, you might be able to get value out of this. I'm not sure. The Luminarch of Heish, overall, I just feel it's too expensive. It's great for sniping like giants and stuff like that, but as they're not used a whole heck of a lot, I don't think this should be used a whole heck of a lot either. The steam tank is a decent artillery piece that's very good in melee and close quarters. Very expensive though. It really depends on who you're going up against, whether you can swing a steam tank or not. Generally speaking, if you're going up against opponents that do not have good armor piercing, or generally don't bring many armor piercing units, that's the time to bring the steam tank, because with 160 armor, they're going to have a hell of a time getting into this thing. The other thing that works pretty well against it, besides armor piercing, I should mention, is units that do magical damage. But other than that, they're going to have a hell of a time getting rid of that thing. The Tempelhof Luminarch is quite interesting. And considering it's only 125 more than the Luminarch, if you're going to bring a Luminarch, bring this guy, okay? And the reason being is he has the ability to cast the net, which is extremely powerful because you can shoot a giant or another large unit several times, or a Cygor, pin it down, and then shoot at it some more. And that's quite good, but at 23-25, unless you're absolutely sure you're going to see Kolek on the field or a giant or something, it's really hard to justify the use of any Luminarch. But only 125 more, you do lose a little bit of leadership, but it's definitely worth it to get that net. And, of course, the additional prestige of bringing a regiment of renown. So that sums up each of the units for the Empire. Again, it is the strongest, most versatile faction in the game, and this latest DLC, the Grim and the Grave, has only made that even more true. Empire is a great faction for starters, beginners, and competitive play, as well as experts. It's a very forgiving faction, meaning you don't have to have the best micro or the best composition, because everything they have is really quite effective. Now, is it ridiculously overpowered? Absolutely not. But they are the best faction. And you can go artillery heavy or missile heavy. Now, I don't mean primarily going with those, but I mean heavier than most. You can use magic, you can use heroes, you can use infantry or cavalry. Everything they have is really freaking good. So, in general, I highly recommend the Empire to everybody. I hate playing against them, so that's a pretty darn good sign that they're very good. So I hope this helped you out. If it did, please like, please subscribe. I'm very excited about building a community. If you have thoughts that I didn't bring up or questions, please put them below in the comments. Again, this is the Magnus, and then until next time, thanks and take care.